confronted my boyfriend about his sister-in-law making him a special plushie for Christmas, and now my insecurities are festering. Despite his denial, I have to start by admitting that maybe I'm wrong, maybe even just insecure in this whole situation. But I really need another perspective, because as much as I try, I can't shake how much this bothers me. I'm feeling jealousy. There, I said it. I've been dating my boyfriend for 6 months now. He comes from a big family with 4 siblings, 3 brothers, 1 sister. Every other brother is either married or in a long-term relationship, and I'm the clear outlier as the one in the newest relationship. Even the youngest couple among them have been together for 5.5 years. It's hard not to feel a little intimidated and insecure. Christmas this year, something happened that I can't stop replaying in my mind. My boyfriend's sister-in-law made him a homemade plushie, an adorable blue, baby dinosaur sort of character from his favorite game, Guild Wars. It wasn't just a generic plushie, either. The quality was incredible, and I could tell from the second he unwrapped it that he was over the moon. But what really set me off was the fact that she didn't make one for any of the other brothers, even though she knows they love the game just as much. Not even her own husband got one. She even gave the gift to my boyfriend in a way that felt strangely private. No other brothers around, except her husband, who seemed almost as excited for my boyfriend to get the gift as she was. It all felt off. I haven't been able to shake that uneasy feeling. Why did she go through so much trouble for him, specifically? Why such a personal gift just for my boyfriend? It made what I gave him feel small, insignificant in comparison, and I hated feeling like she completely overshadowed me. It gnawed at me so much I eventually brought it up with my boyfriend. I tried to explain why I thought the whole thing was weird. He told me he didn't find it odd at all, since he and his sister-in-law had always been closer than he was with the other brothers. But shouldn't she be closest to her husband? He didn't get a plushie. That fact alone kept circling in my mind. I even asked him if he'd consider giving the plushie back, saying something like he couldn't accept it. He flatly refused and told me I was being ridiculous, which made me feel even worse, like maybe I really was overreacting. Still, deep down, I couldn't shake the belief that a woman just doesn't make such a personal, tailored gift like that for a guy unless she sees him as something more. Maybe that's just how I was raised, but it's a feeling I can't ignore, and I hate resenting her for something like a plushie. I ended up talking to my mom and my sister about it, desperate for some outside perspective. Both of them agreed it was strange, that it wasn't right. They even suggested it could be the start of her trying to push me out, to make my boyfriend like her more than me. Their words echoed my own insecurities. I keep replaying this Christmas in my mind, his surprise, her excitement, my growing doubt. I wonder if she was trying to stake some sort of claim, or prove she understood him better than I did. After all, she's never given him anything before, and this is our first Christmas together. Was I really just overthinking everything? Or is there something lurking beneath the surface that I can't quite put my finger on? Update 1. For a few weeks, I kept quiet about the subject, mostly because everyone seemed to be against my perspective. Then, last Saturday, my boyfriend told me he'd be spending the day at his brother's house, just to hang out. Saturdays were generally our days together, and although we hadn't officially made plans yet, I thought it was just understood by now. So I asked him if I could join him there. That's when he told me it was just a day for him and his brother. I pointed out that since it was his brother's house, his wife would likely be there, so it didn't really seem fair to keep me out. That's when everything exploded between us. I ended up telling him everything, brought up the gift again, told him how I felt intimidated by everyone, and that it seemed like his sister-in-law was on some sort of pedestal because she could be there while I couldn't. I told him I felt like I was being pushed out by her, that the gift made me uneasy, and that the whole situation just left me feeling on edge. He seemed frustrated and told me he was going to his brother's anyway, and that we could talk later. So, all Saturday morning, I sat there, jealous and anxious and completely on edge. Then, around 1 p.m., his sister-in-law called me. Apparently, he gave her my number, and asked if I was free to meet for coffee. Confused but curious, I agreed, expecting it to be the most awkward cup of coffee ever. At the coffee shop, she didn't waste any time. She told me my boyfriend had told her everything and she wanted to meet in person so I could see for myself that she was genuine and had nothing to hide. She explained she had no feelings for him in the way I feared, no intention of pushing me out of the picture, and that the plushie was originally supposed to be for all the boys because they all played the game, but it took too long to make. So, she decided to give it as a special Christmas present to her favorite brother-in-law. I pressed, and asked why not her actual husband? She said that since she lived with him, he already knew about the plushie and she could make him another any time, but she wanted that particular one to be a surprise. I told her I still thought it was kind of inappropriate since my boyfriend was in a relationship with me, and she just paused for a few seconds. Then she asked if there was anything else that was bothering me. I brought up that it bothered me he went to her house that day, told me not to come because it was a day with his brother, even though obviously she would be there too. She explained that, yes, it was a day for the brothers, but just because she lived there didn't change that. She kept to herself, she said, while the boys played video games, and only saw my boyfriend when he came into the kitchen to talk to her briefly, about me. I stayed quiet. I still felt jealous, but I didn't know what to say. She asked if there was anything else I wanted to get off my chest. I declined. Then she said before we left, She wanted to give me some advice. She thought I seemed nice and her whole family felt that way, but reminded me that everybody new to the family had to go through a period of adjustment. She told me about how she'd felt the same way at one point, how it just takes time to become close with everyone. Then she told me, in the kindest way she could, that if I didn't work on my insecurities, I would lose my boyfriend. She told me that overthinking and insecurity would ruin a good thing, especially over his own sister-in-law interacting with him. That's when, completely overwhelmed, I blurted out, well, if you were to get a divorce, then you wouldn't be his sister-in-law and you'd just be another woman in his life. Immediately I realized how crazy I sounded. She gave me this look and said, well, we're not getting a divorce, so. And I was just completely mortified and apologized to her. She told me, kindly but truthfully, that maybe I wasn't ready for a relationship at all, and I really needed to work on myself. That ended our coffee together. I spent the entire rest of the weekend crying and hating myself. My boyfriend never called or texted. Finally, on Monday, he texted asking if he could come over. When he arrived, he asked how things went with his sister-in-law. I assumed he knew everything, but he said all she'd told him was that he needed to talk to me. Turns out the reason he hadn't contacted me all weekend was because he was angry about my reaction to him going to his brother's house, and about me bringing up the gift again. He just needed space. He told me he couldn't deal with this behavior anymore and that the drama was just too much for him. He broke up with me. He told me he still cared about me, but couldn't imagine how much worse it would get in the future if I was already acting this way with his family. I begged him not to leave, promised I'd change, but it didn't matter. He just left. Now I haven't heard from him since, and it feels like my heart's been torn out and stomped on. I know this is all my fault. My mom and sister are telling me it's good riddance, and that he just wanted to be with his sister-in-law, which completely broke me. I'm so done with letting my family put these toxic ideas into my head. I'm just done. This is not a happy ending. From here, I really am planning to work on myself and hope that maybe, someday, he will give me another chance. I just needed to let everything out, and facing it all makes it so clear, I need to change. Update 2. I lasted 12 days without reaching out. On the 13th, I started pulling everything out of the hall closet to make a donation pile, and there it was, zipped inside a canvas tote with one of his hoodies, the stupid, perfect blue dinosaur. I sat on the floor and just held it for a minute, feeling that hot, embarrassed sting in my throat because all I could think was, of course. Even after he's gone, this is still here. I didn't text him. I didn't tell anyone. I drove it to his brother's house and decided I'd set it on the porch with a note and leave before anyone noticed. I wasn't even going to ring the bell. I got as far as the step, put the plushie down, and the door opened. It was her. We both froze. She looked at the dinosaur, then at me standing there like a kid trying to sneak out of detention. I said, I'm not here to make a scene. I found it with his hoodie. I just wanted it back where it belongs. She stepped aside and said, do you want water? You look like you're going to pass out. I said no. She nodded, then said, wait. If you're willing, come in for 5 minutes. I hesitated. She didn't look angry. She looked tired and gentle. I went in. In the kitchen she set the plushie on the counter like we were giving it its own seat at the table. I told her I was sorry. I told her I've started therapy and I'm not asking for anything from anyone, I just didn't want to hold on to something that wasn't mine. She leaned on the counter and watched me the way people watch a cat they don't want to spook. Then she said, I didn't tell you this before because I didn't know you my pain, but since you cared enough to come here quietly, I'm going to trust you with the truth and I'm going to ask you not to share it. She and her husband had a loss in October. She said the word miscarriage once and then didn't say it again. She told me my ex was the one who drove her to the ER because her husband was stuck across town dealing with a downed power line and the entire family was at a wedding venue walkthrough. My ex sat with her for 8 hours under fluorescent lights while she shivered under a paper blanket and they talked about pointless things to make the clock move, guild wars, recipes he wanted to try, the way the hospital coffee always tastes like pennies even when it's fresh. He kept me breathing, she said, very simply. He kept me from jumping to the worst possible future in my head. I was not giving him a romantic gift. I was giving him something I made with my hands because it was the only way I know how to say thank you. She told me she did plan on making something for her husband later, privately, but the first finished one went to the person who kept her in one piece the night she fell apart. That's why she gave it to him when it was just them. That's why her husband was standing there grinning. He knew, she said. He was grateful too. I cried. Not pretty tears. I stood in her kitchen with my hands on the edge of the counter and cried because I understood, finally, that I had made a love triangle out of someone else's worst day. I told her I was sorry, really sorry, not the kind you say to make noise. She handed me a dish towel and said, I forgive you. But don't make me regret trusting you. I promised I wouldn't. I won't. I thought that was going to be it. I picked up my keys and turned, and that's when his truck pulled in. The timing was cruel in the way real life is. He walked in, saw me, saw the dinosaur on the counter, and his whole face went from surprise to wary in a second. I said, I found it with your hoodie. I brought it back. I didn't explain anything else because it wasn't my story to tell. His sister-in-law, bless her, said, I'm going to the backyard to call your brother, and left us in the kitchen like she'd staged it on purpose. He didn't sit. He leaned against the doorway like he was keeping his body ready to leave if he had to. I told him I was getting help. I told him I had no demands and I wasn't there to argue. I told him I was sorry for how I handled everything and that I was ashamed of the things I said to his family. I told him I wasn't going to involve my mom or my sister in my life like that anymore. He just listened. His jaw unclenched eventually. He said, "I needed you to say that to me and not about me." It was quiet for a second and then he said, "I'm angry about how it went. I'm still angry. But I've also been sad." He looked at the plushie, then back at me. We were good until we weren't. He asked me not to repeat anything I might have learned that day, and I told him I wouldn't. He believed me. I could tell by the way his shoulders dropped a fraction. Then he said, "I'm not promising anything. I don't want to pick this back up like nothing happened. If we ever try again, it has to be from a different place." I said I understood. I meant it. He asked if, in a month, we could meet for a coffee and talk for real, no family, no fights. I said yes. He said if either of us changed our minds, we should say so, not ghost. He picked up the dinosaur and said, almost to himself, "I'll leave it here for now." On my way home my mom texted me a screenshot of a long message she'd written him that she hadn't sent yet, all caps and accusations and dramatic lines about women with no boundaries. I pulled over, called her, and told her to stop. I told her this was my relationship and my mess and if she sent that, she wouldn't be talking to me for a long time. She told me I was making a mistake. I blocked her and my sister when I got home. It felt like cutting a thread that had been wrapped too tight around my throat. I don't know what happens in a month. I know I'm not owed a reunion. I also know the blue dinosaur is not a threat, and the real threat was my own certainty that I could read everyone else's intentions better than they could. I'm still embarrassed. I'm also grateful I opened the right door at the wrong time and heard what I needed to hear. And for once, I'm going to let that be enough for now. Update 3. I thought a month would feel like a crawl. It didn't. It was a stretch of quiet I didn't realize my brain was capable of. Therapy turned into this strange weekly exercise where I learned how to put a hand on my own shoulder, literally, embarrassingly, and say I hear you to whatever panic monster showed up. I cleaned my apartment like I was moving out of an old version of myself. I switched off location sharing. I took my mom and sister off the emergency contact list and put my neighbor down instead, the lady with the cactus garden who leaves muffins on the mail table. I kept my promises to nobody but me because that was the only person whose timeline I could control. The coffee day came on a Wednesday that smelled like thawed snow and wet wool. He picked the place, the one with the scratched tables and the syrup that always drips in a perfect amber snail trail on the pump. He was on time. He was carrying the blue dinosaur like it was just an object and also not. He set it on the table between us, facing out, like it was there to listen and not be discussed. We didn't dive in. We put our coats on the backs of chairs and made nervous comments about the music, a 90s playlist that kept almost playing a song we recognized and then skipping to another. Then he said, "I told my brother we were meeting and nobody else," and I said, "I told nobody," and that cracked something brittle in both of us. He didn't ask me to defend anything. He said, "If we ever do this, it has to be without narrators," and I told him I had fired mine. I told him I was sorry for making a story where everyone else was a character and I was the main one. He nodded and didn't rescue me from the silence that followed, which was both terrifying and respectful. I said I'd understand if he didn't want to try again at all. He said, "I'm not promising anything today. I am open to seeing what you do with time." We talked like people applying for jobs we weren't sure we wanted. He told me he started talking to someone through his work about boundaries with family and how he always just went along, because it was easier, and it wasn't easier. I told him about opposite actions, how I'm trying to do the thing my panic tells me not to do, which is sit still and wait. Somewhere between our second coffees, the door opened and in walked my mom. She locked on me like a hawk locks on a field mouse. It was a physical sensation, that old hook in my ribs being tugged. She didn't even look at him at first. She went straight to me and reached for my hand and said, "Too loud, tell me you're not crawling back to this." A couple of heads turned. He didn't move. The dinosaur stared at the pastry case like it was studying the bear claws. I stood up because staying seated felt like being pushed into a wall. I kept my voice even because therapy said your voice can be a steering wheel. I said, "You have to leave." She blinked at me like I'd spoken another language. She said she was there to protect me and that women like her get in your house and never leave, and she meant his sister-in-law with that ragged little her, and the heat that washed through me was shame and anger and something that felt like grief for the version of me that would have agreed. I said, "You don't get to talk about her. You don't get to talk to him. You don't get to talk for me." My hands were shaking. I didn't say the word I could have said that would have shut her up, that would have detonated the whole kitchen scene from my suitcase of secrets. I didn't tell her why the dinosaur existed. I didn't use someone else's worst day as a shield. I just looked at the barista and said, "If she doesn't leave, can you please call someone?" And the barista nodded like she'd been waiting to be asked all afternoon. My mom tried one more time, my name stretched into something that used to pull me back by the ankle. I shook my head. She left because she hates being watched more than she loves being right. The little bell on the door did its stupid cheerful jingle after her and I sat down so fast my chair hiccuped on the floor. He didn't say, "Good job." He didn't clap. He didn't touch me. He just breathed out like he'd been holding air for a long time and said, very quietly, "Thank you for not making her my problem." We finished the coffees. We took a walk around the block because neither of us wanted to end the energy on that scene. The sidewalks were slushy and the sky had that almost sunset blue that makes everything look colder than it is. We passed a cooking school that had a chalkboard out front with wonky handwriting. Thursday night pasta, no experience needed. He laughed, actually laughed, the sound I'd been replaying in my head at 2 a.m. for weeks, and said, "I keep talking about wanting to learn and then never doing it." I said, opposite action would be signing up and not researching it to death. He looked at me like he was trying to figure out if I was joking, and then he took out his phone and said, "Okay. Thursday." He held it so I could see him pick the date. He turned the screen so I could see him put a reminder that said pasta with my name, 6 p.m. He didn't ask what we were calling it. Neither did I. I thought about texting the class to cancel 3 times between then and the next night. I did none of those times. We met at the door, both carrying the same kind of nervous, tidy energy you bring to a meet the parents dinner or a proctored exam. The room smelled like flour and lemon cleaner. The instructor was a woman with a tattoo of a whisk on her forearm and the absolute authority of someone who knows that people are going to panic about dough and she's got them anyway. We were terrible at first. Our first batch came out like little earplugs. He swore softly every time one stuck to his fingers. I said, "You're overcomplicating it," and then realized what I'd said and clapped my hand over my mouth and he started laughing so hard he had to lean on the counter. The instructor came by and sprinkled more semolina in a gesture that felt like forgiveness. Somewhere between bad earplugs and acceptable shells, I looked up and his shoulders were where they sit when he's not waiting for a blow. He rolled a piece that looked exactly like a tiny dinosaur footprint, and we both saw it at the same time, and then he looked at me like, "Are we allowed to find this funny?" And when I laughed, he laughed, and it was just a shape in dough and not a symbol dragged to death. We ate our mistakes. We packed 2 neat containers of things that looked like food. We didn't kiss in the parking lot. He asked if I wanted the hoodie back and I said, "Not yet, or maybe not ever. It smells like a life I was trying to live too fast." We stood there in our coats with our plastic clamshells and made a plan. One more low-stakes thing next week, a movie in a theater where we could ignore each other if we needed to, no meeting at anyone's house, no surprise relatives. If either of us felt weird, we would say yellow light and put the brakes on without turning the whole car around. When I got home, there was a voicemail from my mother in that voice she uses when she's mixing apology with bait. I put my phone on the counter and let the little red batch sit. I reheated my sad pasta. I looked at my empty coat rack where a hoodie might have hung and felt, for the first time in months, not the absence of him but the presence of me in my own space. I don't know if we'll end up together again. I know that we shared a table with a small blue dinosaur and didn't let it narrate us. I know I didn't use a secret that wasn't mine for leverage even when the old part of me begged me to. I know that I can roll imperfect little shells of dough next to someone I hurt and make something edible out of a mess. For now, that is more than I had, and just enough to keep going. Update 4. The movie should have been easy. We'd chosen something loud and silly on purpose, an action thing with a plot like a straight line. We made it 10 minutes into the trailers before a hospital monitor beeped on screen for a split second in some melodramatic birth scene for a different film and I felt him go still the way a deer goes still, everything moving except the eyes. I touched the sleeve of his jacket and said yellow light like I was pulling a cord on a bus, and we were on our feet before the scene even finished. We stood in the lobby with the neon buzzing and the popcorn machine breathing out butter perfume at us and neither of us made a joke. He said, "Thank you," and I said, "Dumplings?" And he laughed once in that way that shakes out a knot. We ate dumplings that were shaped like little folded moons and talked about nothing important, the tile grout in the mall that looks like a map, how the chili oil separates and then makes up with itself. He didn't make me explain how I knew and I didn't ask him whether he would have said it first. The yellow light did what it was supposed to do. It slowed us down without making us stop. On the way to our cars he said his brother had texted about board games on Friday, small group, no extras, did I want to come? The phrase his brother's house used to live in my throat like a fishbone. It didn't catch this time, maybe because he said it without trying to convince me, like a weather report. I said, "Yellow light but yes," and he nodded like he'd been prepared for a no. Friday smelled like fried onions and dry winter air. His brother's dining table was a field of tiny wooden people who all had jobs I didn't understand. The blue dinosaur was on a bookshelf wearing a very serious paper party hat someone had taped to its head at a tragic angle. The hat made me want to apologize to it. His sister-in-law waved from the kitchen and then left us alone like she'd been practicing leaving us alone her whole life. We learned a game where farmers feed cities and I was terrible at it in a way that turned into a running joke. He kept giving my little orange people grain when I forgot to harvest, just sliding it over like a quiet Tennessee Williams heroine giving someone a cigarette. Every time our hands bumped, both of us watched our hands say nothing. After, her husband got a call from his dad about a burst pipe and there was a shuffle of jackets and plans. She lifted her keys and then looked at me, and I could see her doing the math of 2 cars and 1 driveway in her head, deciding whether to ask the thing she was thinking. "Would you mind giving me a ride?" she said. I could feel the old organ in me that used to ring when I was near her stay quiet. "Of course," I said, and it was true. We didn't talk until the first red light. She had both hands on her tote like it was a cat that might decide to dash. When she spoke, it was one clean sentence. I need you to hold something for me for a little while again. The word again laid itself down between us like a ribbon. I kept my eyes on the road and said, okay. She said, we're 9 weeks. She didn't say the word that would have knocked the air out of both of us. She didn't have to. My cheeks went hot and then cold and I said the least spectacular thing I could think of, which was, do you want water? She laughed in a way that sounded more like exhale than humor. I have ginger candies. And I'm telling my parents Sunday. We're telling his family next week. Please don't. Any of that online. You know, I said, and that was the whole contract. When I pulled up in front of her house, she didn't reach for the door right away. Thank you for not using other people's pain like a tool, she said, the way you'd say, thank you for not parking in a handicapped spot. Not dramatic. Just the baseline of decency named out loud. I nodded because anything bigger would have made my throat do a thing I didn't want to do in her driveway. She went inside and I drove away and didn't text anyone, which is still, some days, the most adult thing I do. 2 days later, he sent me a message that was just a dinosaur emoji and the word, thanks. Then, next week my brother is doing this little tacos and cards thing. No pressure, but I'm telling you because I want you to hear it from me. I stared at the 3 dots until they turned into nothing and then I typed, I can do tacos. He said, good, because you're in charge of cutting limes, which is his way of giving me a job when he doesn't know where to put me yet. His brother's kitchen on taco night was lime rinds and cilantro confetti. Somebody had found a tiny knit scarf for the dinosaur and it was wearing it like a serious graduate. We were 2 bodies introduced to a room full of other bodies without narrative stapled to our foreheads. I cut limes until my fingers stung and then pretended to wash my hands for too long because I needed the cold. His sister-in-law touched my elbow once and said, very quietly, I'm going to tell them tonight. I said, do you want me to take pictures? And she blinked like I'd offered something she hadn't included in her list of options. Yes, she said, and then smiled at me like we were conspirators in a heist to steal back the good from a world that had taken it once. The reveal itself was nothing like a movie. There was no speech. There was a line in the conversation she stepped into and changed. We're going to need a high chair by Thanksgiving, she said, dropping it into the pot like a bay leaf. For a second nobody got it. Then everybody got it at once. There was one cry that might have been a laugh and might have been the sound someone makes when they realize they're allowed to breathe. His brother reached for her the way you reach for a falling plate. My ex made the face of someone who swallowed his own heart by accident and then found out it was fine. I took 3 pictures that didn't blur and one that did, and the one that did was the best because it looked like joy moves. I kept my phone face down because it buzzed like a fly. Later I saw the notifications. My mother, a number I didn't know, a friend of hers I haven't spoken to since high school with a comment about family tea. I didn't open any of it. I took the dish towel somebody threw and wiped lime juice off the counter. I handed his sister-in-law a glass of water and stood close without being in the circle because sometimes that's all your job is. He walked me out to my car without asking and the air was the kind that snaps. We didn't hug. We stood like 2 fence posts that knew a line ran between them even if you couldn't see it in the dark. He said, she told me you knew and didn't tell me. I said, it wasn't mine to say. He nodded and did a small, private thing with his mouth that I've seen him do when a puzzle clicks. We're going slow, he said, half reminding me, half reminding himself. I know, I said. I brought a lime knife to a card night. Slow is my brand now. He laughed and the sound wasn't old or new. It was current. Back at my place, I listened to my mother's voicemail in the morning, on purpose, with coffee in my hand, so it would have somewhere to land besides my nervous system. It was a weather report of someone else's storm. I deleted it and the message from the unknown number and the friend request that was shaped like a trap, and then I put my phone on the dresser and went to water my cactus with the measuring cup I never use for baking. The sun came in sideways and turned the spines into silver lines. There's a small blue dinosaur in a paper hat on someone else's bookshelf, wearing a scarf like it means business. There's a tiny person the size of a grape with a future nobody can promise. There's a boy who says yellow light and means I won't make you pay for being careful, and a girl who cuts limes and doesn't hand other people's secrets to the sink disposal because she's panicking. We're not back. We're not. I am, bizarrely, okay in the middle. I didn't know there was a middle like this. I didn't know I could stand here without narrating it to death. Update 5. The call came at 5:17 a.m. That weird hour where your apartment sounds like it's holding its breath. Her name on my screen made my stomach drop and then I said hello and she said, very level, can you drive me? The word spotting came out once and then she didn't say it again. I put on yesterday's jeans, didn't look in a mirror, didn't text anyone. The street was a cold blue you can only get right before sunrise. She came down her front steps in a sweatshirt and the tote I've come to recognize as her going everywhere bag. We didn't talk in the car. I parked crooked outside the ER and she squeezed my wrist like it was a handle and we went in. The fluorescent lights were the same brand as October in my head and the bad coffee still tasted like someone had rinsed pennies in it. Opposite action was the thing I could hold. I kept my phone face down. I put my palm on my own shoulder the way my therapist taught me, quietly, like I was tending a horse. She did the intake and I watched the second hand on the clock go around like it was doing a job and not teasing us. I sent one text to him. I have her. She's at county. You can call your brother. He wrote back 2 dots and then nothing, which I later realized was him typing and deleting and typing on repeat because he didn't want to ask me for the ending to a story that wasn't mine. A nurse with soft-soled shoes said they could take one person in with her for the exam. Her husband was on his way from a job site and I was already sitting in the chair by the door like a placeholder. I stood up and she said, "Stay," and I did because she asked. In the dim room the monitor glowed the gray-black that makes everything feel like a storm. I looked at the ceiling tiles like they were constellations nobody had named. The wand went where it needed to and the midwife angled the screen, searching. And then there it was, a bright little moth behind glass, a flicker that was both smaller and larger than any word. She didn't cry, not right then. She exhaled like she'd been underwater and someone put a hand on her back and I realized it was mine. The midwife said things like measuring appropriately and some people bleed and take it easy, and I stored those phrases in my chest like matches in a dry tin. Her husband appeared in the doorway holding his hard hat like it had turned into a sacred object, and I stepped back into the chair by the door without anyone telling me to, and then I stepped out into the hallway altogether. We went to a diner after, because it felt wrong to go straight home with that much adrenaline sitting on our tongues. The pancakes were the width of hubcaps and the butter came in a square that had a dent like somebody's thumb had tested it for softness. She put a slice of banana on her fork and then didn't eat it for a full minute, just held it there like a vote. "You're allowed to be scared," I said. "And then you're allowed to be okay." She nodded and looked at the jelly caddies like she was weighing the merits of grape versus strawberry at a moral level. When we parted in her driveway she didn't hug me, she touched her fingers to mine like she was returning borrowed gloves. We didn't tell anybody else. I didn't tell anybody else. He called me that afternoon, which he doesn't do during the day. His voice had gravel in it and relief sanded the edges. "She told me you were there," he said. "Thank you for not taking it from me." I said, "It wasn't mine to take, and I meant the whole thing, not just the story." He asked if I wanted to walk after dinner. No plan, just the sidewalk. I said yes. We met in that pocket of evening where the sky is navy and every window makes a warm square. He didn't fill the air with jokes. We passed a dog in a sweater committing to a smell like it was an exam. We walked 3 blocks and said nothing, and then he said, "I put the dinosaur on a higher shelf." It felt like it wanted to see the kitchen. It was such a ridiculous sentence and also exactly the sentence. I told him about the monitor and how the sound it made used to live in my bones, and I told him I could hear it and stay in the room this time. He said yellow light, and we sat on a low wall and let our knees hang over the grass for a minute because the light between us had shifted and he wanted to name that we could slow it without making it a siren. Saturday we did something as unromantic as a list in a pocket. We went to the messy end of the flea market where the bins are all 50-cent cords and unattached Tupperware lids and mismatched glasses. He needed a colander and refused to buy a fancy one on principle. We held 3 different metal ones up to the light like they could tell us their past lives. He picked the one with a dent and a handle that had a little notch. "I like notches," he said. "They mean it's held on to something." At a table of baby clothes, she would have cried. I didn't stop because I didn't step into that aisle. We bought 2 mugs that don't match anything. One with a chip where your lip doesn't go. A teenage boy busked on a keyboard with a 90s song that never finished being a 90s song, and we both looked at each other when it skipped. We didn't narrate it. We just kept walking. He asked if I wanted to come over to boil pasta we had actually made and not just talked about making. His apartment smelled like a mix of onions and clean laundry. The dinosaur had moved, as warned, up a shelf and was wearing its scarf like a person who has earned a scarf. We boiled the shells that didn't look like earplugs. My job was stirring and not letting the pepper seize. His job was salt until your great aunt in Sicily tells you to stop, which neither of us has, so we eyeballed it. We ate standing up at the counter, our shoulders almost in the same orbit. He reached to brush a breadcrumb off my sleeve and then paused and said, "Yellow?" And I said, "Yellow," and the breadcrumb got to live there for a full minute until I flicked it myself and we both smiled at how unsmooth we looked. Neither of us died of it. In the space where old me would have engineered a symbolic gesture, he went to a closet and came back with a hat he had made at a mandatory community engagement thing at work where someone with patience and a circle of thick yarn tried to teach accountants how to knit. It was a lopsided beanie in a gray that looked like rain. "If you make fun of it I'll go home," he said, and I didn't make fun of it because the dumb little hat was the opposite of a grand gesture. I put it on and it sat on my head like a willing mushroom, and he laughed, and the laugh didn't have any apology in it. A letter from my mother arrived on Tuesday, her handwriting doing that soft loopy thing it does when she thinks a curve will hide a hook. I took it to therapy and didn't open it on my couch at midnight like a raccoon with a shiny thing. I opened it with someone whose job it is to watch my face, and I read 3 sentences and then stopped because my body wanted to sprint, and I'm learning that sprinting can be a thought and not an action. I put it back in the envelope. I wrote a short note in return with a straight spine. "I am not available for contact at this time. I will reach out if that changes. Do not come to my home. Do not contact people in my life. If you do, I will involve other people who are not you or me." I signed my name like you sign something that belongs to you and mailed it without letting my hands shake in public. On Thursday she sent me a picture, the toad on the floor, the gummy prenatal vitamin next to a glass of water, a small folded onesie with triangles on it in colors that weren't a gender announcement or a team flag. "Heartbeat," she wrote, Just that, and then a dinosaur emoji like an inside stretch of blue turning its head in a sunbeam. I didn't reply with words. I sent the thumbs up that doesn't look like much, but in my body felt like a hand pressed against the small of her back so she could lean into it if she needed to. We are not declaring anything in bios or rearranging drawers. We are throwing out the pasta water and washing the pot before it dries into a problem. We are making space on a shelf for a dented colander and not pretending it's new. We are letting yellow be something you can say out loud without making the room tense. There is a small person we don't know yet blinking in the soft, gray universe of a screen that isn't ours. There is a blue dinosaur who has somehow become a weather vane for decency and is currently watching over a kitchen like it's guarding a very serious soup. There is me, mid-walk, mid-breath, hands empty, not narrating it to death, choosing the next step and then taking it.